Stripped of everything in the middle of a cold, unforgiving courtroom, former Navy SEAL Logan Pierce walked out the doors with absolutely nothing. No explanation, no kind parting words, and absolutely no inheritance from his own flesh and blood. While his greedy relatives gloated over the massive estate they had just seized, Logan was left with his only remaining companion, his loyal K9, Atlas. But those heartless family members had no idea that the very moment they pushed this combat veteran to the brink, the gears of a massive, buried secret began to turn. Right on the snowy steps of the courthouse, engulfed in a brutal Montana blizzard, an unfamiliar woman approached Logan. She handed him a single envelope sealed in deep red wax from his late great-aunt, Eleanor. That letter wasn't just a final goodbye, it was the key to a hidden mansion deep within the Timber Ridge Mountains. There, concealed behind freezing stone walls and heavy reinforced steel vault doors, lay a staggering $265 million fortune that the previous generation had carefully buried away. But Eleanor didn't just leave behind money. She left a blueprint of loyalty, a final test that only someone with a brave, deeply scarred heart could decode. Alongside Atlas, a dog whose instincts went far beyond those of an ordinary animal, Logan had to walk straight into the eye of the storm. Together, they wouldn't just face the worst blizzard in 50 years. They would have to stand their ground against the very people who shared Logan's blood, relatives willing to use armed force and ruthless enforcers to steal everything he was meant to protect. This wasn't just a battle for an inheritance. It was a soldier's journey to reclaim his purpose, where his dog would lead him to a hidden vault, a buried legacy, and a truth powerful enough to upend an entire family.
He walked out of court with nothing, only for his loyal K9 to uncover a secret mansion holding a 265mm truth his family buried. Snow hammered the Montana mountains when former SEAL Logan Pierce lost everything in a single courtroom. But on that same day, a letter from a forgotten aunt pulled him into a storm far bigger than the blizzard outside. One where his dog would lead him to a hidden vault, a buried legacy, and a truth powerful enough to upend generations. The fluorescent lights in the Bozeman County Courthouse hummed with a dull, steady buzz, the kind that seeped into a man's bones if he sat still long enough. Former Navy SEAL Logan Pierce sat rigid in his chair, shoulders squared out of habit, jaw tight with the discipline of a man who had survived far worse than a probate hearing. Still, nothing in his military years had prepared him for the cold sting of this moment. The judge's voice echoed through the oak-paneled room with a finality that felt like a blade sliding into place. According to the validated will of Marjorie Pierce, all property and financial assets shall be transferred to the following beneficiaries. Logan kept his eyes forward, unmoving. He expected little, maybe a faded keepsake, a photo album, but not this, not nothing. Aunt Helen Carver adjusted her pearl necklace, the diamonds at her wrist catching the courtroom lights like sharp fragments of ice. Her children, Bryce and Lydia, leaned back in their chairs, smug smiles plastered across their faces as the judge listed off the inheritance. The Calvert Ranch, worth millions, land holdings near Livingston, investment portfolios stacked thicker than winter logs. And to her son, Logan Pierce, the judge paused, though the papers in front of him held no surprise. There is no designated inheritance. No explanation. No kind words. Not even a memory mentioned in her final documents. A hush swept over the courtroom like a cold wind. Logan's fists curled slowly, the knuckles paling as he forced himself to breathe. He had faced down gunfire, desert heat, and nights filled with shadows of the past. But this was a different kind of blow, one that landed in the quiet part of a man's heart. From across the aisle, Bryce leaned forward, smirking. Guess walking away from the family wasn't the smartest move after all. His voice carried just enough for Logan to hear. Should have stuck around instead of running off to play soldier. Lydia snickered behind her manicured hand. Well, maybe he can still apply somewhere. I hear security guards make decent tips. Helen didn't stop them. She never had. Logan stood slowly. His chair legs scraped against the floor, cutting through the murmurs around him. The judge had already moved on, his attention drifting to paperwork, unaware of the sting blooming in the back of Logan's throat. He turned toward the double doors, the bitter taste of humiliation sitting heavy on his tongue. As he stepped into the corridor, cold air brushed his face, clean, quiet, honest in ways people rarely were. Atlas was waiting. The K9 lifted his head the moment Logan appeared, ears perked, amber eyes steady and knowing. The German shepherd shifted closer, pressing his body against Logan's leg as if absorbing the weight he carried. Logan knelt, resting a calloused hand on the dog's thick fur. "Easy, boy," he murmured, though his voice nearly cracked. "We're getting out of here." Behind him, the courtroom doors swung again, and Bryce's laughter drifted into the hall, sharp, ugly, triumphant. Logan didn't turn around. He just stood, squared his shoulders, and let out a long breath that clouded faintly in the winter air drifting through the courthouse entryway. He gave Atlas one more gentle pat, then whispered, "Let's go, boy. We're done here." Atlas nudged Logan's hand, tail low but steady, as they walked toward the exit, two silhouettes cutting through the cold Montana light, carrying the quiet grief of a family that had just shown its true colors. Snowflakes drifted lazily from a gray sky as Logan and Atlas stepped onto the courthouse steps. Cars rolled past on Main Street, tires hissing over slush. People hurried along sidewalks wrapped in coats and scarves, unaware that a man who had survived deployments on 3 continents had just been struck deeper than any wound he'd taken overseas. Logan paused beneath the courthouse awning. He closed his eyes and exhaled long and slow, letting the cold sting his lungs. Atlas leaned his weight against Logan's leg, grounding him in the way only the dog could. "Hey, Mr. Pierce?" a woman's voice called from behind. Logan turned. A woman in her late 50s approached, her heels tapping on the wet concrete. She was bundled in a wool coat and clutched a leather briefcase to her side. Her hair, streaked with silver, framed a thoughtful, steady face. "Logan Pierce?" she repeated, slightly breathless. "I'm Rebecca Langford, attorney. I need a word with you." Logan narrowed his eyes, instinctively stepping half in front of Atlas. "If this is about the hearing, I'm not interested." "It isn't," she said quickly. This is something separate." She opened her case with trembling fingers and pulled out an envelope sealed in deep red wax. His name, Logan Pierce, was handwritten in elegant script across the front. "This was entrusted to me by Eleanor Whitford," she said softly. "Your grandmother's older sister." Logan blinked. The name hit him with distant familiarity, like an echo from a half-forgotten childhood story. Eleanor Whitford. I met her once when I was a kid. She left the family decades ago. "Yes," Rebecca nodded, "and she never returned. But before she passed, she left instructions. This letter was to be delivered to you, specifically after the reading of your mother's will." Logan's chest tightened. "Why?" Rebecca looked at him with something close to sympathy. "Because she knew what was going to happen today." The wind picked up, pushing snow across the courthouse steps. Logan stared at the envelope, his hands hesitant. Atlas sniffed it once, then sat, ears forward, almost expectant. Finally, Logan broke the seal. Inside was thick, cream-colored stationery filled with tight, graceful handwriting. "My dear Logan, if you are holding this, then the cycle has repeated. Our family has always been quick to judge, quick to cast out those who didn't fit their image. They did it to me long before they did it to you." Logan swallowed hard and continued reading. "But I have watched you from afar. Your service, your sacrifice, your loyalty, especially to that remarkable dog of yours. You deserved far more than the treatment you received today. This is why I am leaving you something once built from nothing. My estate at North Timber Ridge. The land, the house, and all that rests within it now belong to you. Atlas nudged his elbow as Logan read the next line. This house guards truths your relatives buried. Trust Atlas. He will show you the way. Logan's breath caught. A shiver, one not caused by the cold, ran through him. Rebecca cleared her throat gently. There's a key included. Logan found it tucked behind the letter. An old brass skeleton key etched with a tiny pine tree symbol. It's real? He asked quietly. It's very real, she answered. 480 acres in the Timber Ridge Mountains, and a mansion that's been untouched for decades. Behind them, church bells rang the top of the hour, echoing across the winter streets. Logan folded the letter carefully and slid it into his jacket. For the first time in years, something flickered in his chest, something small, bright, and fragile. Hope. He looked at Atlas. What do you think, boy? You ready for a road trip? Atlas barked once, sharp and certain, as if he'd been waiting for this moment all along. Logan turned back to Rebecca. Thank you, she nodded. You'll want to leave soon. There's a storm coming in tonight. They're saying it might be the worst in 50 years. Logan glanced toward the horizon, where heavy clouds gathered like an approaching wall. His pulse steadied, the kind of calm that always came before a mission. Then we better get moving. Logan and Atlas walked toward their truck, snow beginning to swirl around them. The courthouse, filled with false smiles and empty hearts, shrunk behind them as the two climbed inside and shut the door. Logan rested his hand on the wheel and whispered, Let's find out what you left for us, Eleanor. Atlas settled beside him, eyes bright. Together, they pulled away from Bozeman and into the gathering storm. By the time Logan reached the highway leading north toward Timber Ridge, the sky had already turned the color of bruised steel. Thick clouds pressed low over the mountains, swallowing the peaks that rose like ancient sentinels above the valley. Traffic thinned until Logan felt as if he and Atlas were driving through a world slowly emptying of people. The first flakes fell just outside Chateau, big, lazy spirals that drifted across the windshield before melting into streaks. Logan flicked the wipers on, his jaw tightening. He had driven in storms before, both on American soil and far from it, but tonight felt different. The air held a sharp electric edge, like the moments before a flashbang. Atlas sensed it too. He sat straight, ears perked, watching the world through the windshield with the alertness of a soldier on patrol. Stay close, buddy, Logan murmured. We might be in for a rough one. As they climbed higher into the mountains, visibility began to collapse. The wind picked up, hurling snow across the road in wild blasts. The truck shuddered under the force, and Logan's hands tightened on the wheel. White swallowed everything. Road markings, trees, even the faint glow of distant ranch lights. The world narrowed to the 10 feet illuminated by his headlights. A gust slammed against the side of the truck, and the tires skidded. Logan reacted on instinct, easing the wheel instead of fighting it, guiding the truck back toward the center of the road. Atlas let out a sharp, worried whine. I'm fine, Logan whispered through clenched teeth. I'm fine. We're okay. A memory flickered. Sandstorms in Kandahar, vehicles rocking under the wind, the distant thud of helicopters they couldn't see but could feel through their boots. He blinked hard, pulling himself back to the present. Still, the storm pressed harder. At mile marker 62, the truck's headlights hit a sheet of ice hidden beneath fresh snow. The back end fishtailed violently. Logan turned into the skid, breath catching as the truck drifted across the empty lane. The tires slid toward the shoulder, where nothing waited but a drop-off into blackness. Atlas barked sharply, bracing his paws against the seat. Logan corrected the wheel again, muscles straining. The truck jerked, then straightened, tires finally gripping pavement. His heart hammered. Atlas leaned into him, nudging his arm with his nose as if checking for damage. "Yeah," Logan breathed, exhaling shakily. "That was close." He adjusted his speed, creeping forward through the swirling white. The blizzard tightened around them, the silence broken only by the rumble of the engine and the rhythmic thump of wipers fighting a losing battle. Minutes stretched into an hour. Then, through the blinding storm, something dark materialized ahead. First a shape, then a silhouette. Then the unmistakable outline of a gate leaning crooked against a stone wall. A wooden sign, half buried in snow, read, "Whitford Estate, Private Road." Logan slowed to a crawl and eased the truck through the entrance. The road beyond was barely visible, swallowed under drifts that rose nearly to the bumper. "We're close," he whispered. Atlas pressed his nose to the window, tail flicking once. The private road snaked up the mountainside, vanishing and reappearing as the wind shifted. Logan navigated by instinct as much as by sight, watching for the faint difference in texture between buried road and open hillside. Twice he had to back up and try a new angle, the truck slipping sideways before finding footing again. Then, just as the storm reached its fiercest, something massive emerged from the whiteout. Logan braked. The mansion rose from the darkness like a fortress carved from another era, 3 stories tall, its stone walls weathered by decades of winter. Snow clung to the steep rooflines and covered the wraparound balconies, softening the edges but not the scale. Towering pines bowed under the weight of ice, framing the estate like guards at attention. Warmth didn't radiate from the place, just presence, history, secrets. Atlas sat perfectly still, staring at the mansion as if he recognized it. Logan killed the engine. The sudden quiet was eerie, broken only by the wind clawing at the walls of the truck. He rested his hand on Atlas's back. "We made it," he whispered. "Somehow, we made it." They stepped out into knee-deep snow, the cold biting instantly through Logan's jacket. Atlas leaped forward, landing with the precision of a trained partner, surveying the grounds in every direction. Together, they trudged toward the front entrance. Logan fished out the old brass key Eleanor had left him, its metal cold as the wind whipping around them. He fitted into the massive oak door. It turned with a heavy, echoing click. The door groaned open, releasing a breath of stale, frozen air from inside the mansion. Logan exchanged a look with Atlas, half uncertainty, half determination. "Let's see what she left us, boy." They stepped inside, leaving the storm behind as the darkness of the Whitford mansion swallowed them whole. The door shut with a heavy thud that echoed through the vast entry hall. Logan paused just inside, letting his eyes adjust. The air was cold enough to sting his lungs, carrying the faint smell of dust, aged wood, and something older, like forgotten winters trapped in stone. He clicked on his flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness and revealed a hallway that seemed to stretch forever. Faded chandeliers hung from the 20-foot ceiling, their crystal drops coated with decades of frost and dust. White sheets draped over furniture created ghostly silhouettes, chairs, tables, a grand piano sitting silent beneath a layer of time. Atlas took a cautious step forward, nose low, tail stiff. His ears twitched in every direction, absorbing sounds Logan couldn't hear. "Easy, boy," Logan murmured. He moved deeper into the hall. Their footsteps echoed on the marble floor, every sound magnified in the cavernous space. Logan trailed his fingers across the railing of the grand staircase, a sweeping curve of carved mahogany that reached toward the second floor like an invitation. "This place," Logan whispered. It felt less like a house and more like a museum sealed away from the world, the kind of place history forgot, but refused to let go. Atlas suddenly froze, body rigid. A low growl rumbled from deep in his chest. Logan swung the flashlight around. Nothing. Just dust, shadows, and the whisper of wind rattling an unseen window. But Atlas didn't growl without reason. The dog's instincts had kept Logan alive more than once. "What is it?" Logan whispered. Atlas sniffed the air, then padded forward, guiding Logan toward the far side of the hall. His footprints left clear impressions in the dusty floor, but right beside them, another set. Logan crouched, shining the light over the prints. They were deeper, larger, and recent. Very recent. The dust around them was unsettled, tracing a line from the front door toward the east wing. Someone had been here, or was still here. A chill crept up Logan's spine that had nothing to do with the cold. He scanned the shadowy doorways ahead, arched frames leading to rooms swallowed in darkness. Atlas sniffed near one entrance, fur bristling, then backed up slightly, tail stiff as a board. "Okay," Logan said quietly. "We follow." He pushed open the door. Inside was a study, cozy once, now frozen in time. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, its hearth filled with cold ash. Shelves climbed to the ceiling, crammed with books whose spines had faded into soft browns and golds. A leather armchair sat beside a table where a journal lay open, its pages curled at the edges. Logan approached slowly, the beam of his flashlight tracing the delicate handwriting across the open page. "The secrets must stay above the heart of the house. Only the one who carries truth and loyalty will find them." The handwriting matched the letter Eleanor had written. Atlas nudged Logan's hand, urging him to keep reading. Rather than turn the page, Logan stepped back and swept the room again. Nothing else seemed disturbed. No footprints here. No signs of recent entry. Which meant whoever had walked through the entry hall hadn't yet reached this room, or they had avoided it altogether. He lifted the journal and flipped through a few pages. Descriptions of mountain winters, notes about property maintenance, sketches of the estate in summertime, and scattered through the entries, moments of sorrow. One line in particular caught his eye. "They took everything from me once. I will not let them take what matters again." Logan set the journal down gently. Atlas wandered toward another doorway at the back of the room. He sniffed the crack beneath it, then looked up at Logan with a soft whine. Something on the other side caught his attention. But Logan didn't open that door yet. Instead, he turned toward the staircase. The second floor loomed above, its banister disappearing into a patch of darkness where the flashlight struggled to reach. "Above the heart of the house," he murmured. Eleanor's words. It had to mean the upper floors. He swept the light across the ceiling, taking in the architecture. Arched beams, carved rosettes, ornate molding that framed the central chandelier. The craftsmanship was too detailed for a simple ranch home. This was built with intention, with purpose. Atlas tugged at his sleeve once, then stepped toward the stairs. He placed one paw on the bottom step and looked back, waiting. Logan nodded. "Yeah, we're going up." Together, they ascended the staircase. Every step groaned beneath their weight, as if the house were waking from a long sleep. Halfway up, a draft swept down from the landing above, cold, sharp, carrying a faint scent Logan couldn't place. By the time they reached the top, Atlas was on high alert. His tail stood straight, ears pointed forward, muscles tight despite the cold. The hallway stretched left and right, lined with doors that stood slightly ajar, as if someone had left in a hurry and never returned. The light flickered across framed photographs, family portraits faded by time, but Logan paused at one. It was Eleanor, decades younger, standing proudly on the mansion's balcony. Her eyes were fierce, her smile gentle, like someone who had built something worth fighting for. Logan whispered, "What were you trying to protect?" The house didn't answer, but something in the air shifted, almost a whisper, a reminder that the secrets Eleanor spoke of were close, hidden behind walls or floors or years of silence. Atlas moved toward the master bedroom door, sniffing intensely. Logan followed. Somewhere above them, a faint noise, almost like a footstep, echoed through the bones of the house. Not wind, not memory. Something else. Atlas growled softly, and Logan knew they weren't alone. The second-floor hallway stretched ahead like a dark tunnel, the shadows bending with the shifting wind pressing against the old wooden frame of the mansion. Logan steadied his breath, forcing down the old instinct to reach for a weapon he no longer carried. He had only his flashlight, his training, and the dog who had saved his life more than once. Atlas stood rigid at his side, ears pinned forward, tail stiff as a rod. His growl deepened, quiet but certain. Logan followed the direction of the dog's gaze. The sound came again, a soft, deliberate creak, not the groan of old wood expanding, not the sigh of winter wind. A footstep. Upstairs. Logan raised the flashlight and swept it across the hallway, exposing dust swirling in the cold air. His beam passed over doorframes, faded wallpaper, and a landscape painting of Timber Ridge in the spring. Nothing moved. But the footstep echoed again, followed by a faint scuff, as if someone shifted their weight on the floorboards overhead. Atlas's hackles rose. "Easy," Logan whispered, though his voice was tight. "We'll check it out." He moved forward, each step controlled, almost silent. The mansion seemed to breathe around him, old timbers settling, glass windows trembling under the storm's pressure. Logan had walked through abandoned compounds, shelled-out structures, empty barracks. This house had that same heavy silence, the kind that made every sound sharper. When they reached the master bedroom, Atlas let out a tense, clipped bark and hurried to the doorway. Logan pushed the door open slowly. The beam of the flashlight revealed a grand bedroom frozen in time. A king-sized bed draped in a dusty canopy, dressers lined with tarnished silver handles, curtains stiff with age. A cracked portrait of Eleanor hung above the fireplace, her painted eyes seeming to follow them. But Atlas wasn't interested in the furniture or the portrait. He was staring at the mirror. A massive antique mirror stood against the wall, taller than Logan himself. The glass was clouded but intact, framed in dark wood carved with mountain peaks and pine branches. The surface shimmered faintly in the flashlight glow. Atlas walked toward it, nose low, and pressed a paw against the bottom edge. Then he pawed harder, scratch, scratch, growing more frantic with each attempt. Logan frowned and approached. "What is it?" Atlas shoved his shoulder into the frame this time. A dull, metallic clunk answered. Logan froze. He lowered his flashlight and inspected the bottom edge. The mirror didn't sit flush against the wall. A slight gap, barely noticeable, ran down the left side. When Logan pressed his palm against the frame, the mirror shifted slightly, revealing the edge of something metal behind it. A concealed panel. Logan's pulse quickened. "You've got good instincts, boy." He braced both hands against the mirror and pushed. It resisted at first, as if rusted into place. Then, with a gritty scrape and another metallic clunk, it swung outward on hidden hinges. Behind it, darkness, and the faint smell of cold, stale air. Logan swept the flashlight inside. A narrow staircase, steep and winding, disappeared upward into shadow. The wood looked ancient, dust thick on the steps, except for a fresh trail of paw prints and footprints. Atlas's prints led into the room, but the ones going up the concealed staircase were larger, fresher. Someone had been here recently, maybe hours ago, maybe minutes. A shiver crawled down Logan's spine. Memories he'd worked hard to bury pushed at the edges of his mind. Corridors in war zones, hidden staircases in compounds, the feeling of being hunted by someone you couldn't see. Atlas nudged his arm, urging him forward. But Logan held up a hand. Wait. He listened. For a long moment, only wind filled the silence. Then, a faint thud from above, followed by the whisper of something shifting, like canvas brushing wood. Logan steadied himself. All right, we go together. He stepped onto the first stair, testing its weight. It groaned, but held. Atlas followed close behind, each paw step silent, trained, purposeful. As they climbed, the narrow passage tightened, the walls closing in. The air grew colder. Dust motes swirled in the beam of Logan's flashlight, like tiny ghosts disturbed from sleep. At the top of the stairs, a wooden door waited, old iron hinges coated in rust. Logan rested his palm against it. The wood felt icy. He pushed. The door swung inward with a low, drawn-out creak, revealing a room bathed in faint blue light from skylights overhead. And the footsteps that had haunted the mansion? Gone. But the room itself told another story, one that made Logan exhale sharply, disbelief mixing with unease. Easels stood in every corner. Paintings lined the walls. A palette sat on a table beside half-used brushes. This was an art studio, untouched for years, yet arranged as if Eleanor had walked out just yesterday. Atlas stepped inside first, nose working furiously. Logan followed, lifting the flashlight to examine the nearest painting. Then he froze. On the canvas was a man in full SEAL uniform, standing beside a German shepherd that looked exactly like Atlas, even down to the faint patch of lighter fur on his chest. The painting was dated, 20 years ago. Logan's breath caught in his throat. This isn't possible. Atlas let out a soft whimper and pressed his nose to the bottom of the canvas. Logan knelt beside him, brushing dust away with his sleeve. Faint markings were carved into the wood frame. 19, 43, 77. Who to? Logan stared. Numbers, dates, a message. The truth, Eleanor promised, was somewhere above the heart of the house. And they had just found the first piece. Logan remained kneeling beside the strange painting, his breath fogging in the icy air drifting through the studio. Skylights overhead, long panes of glass frosted at the edges, pulled in faint moonlight, casting cold blue streaks across the room. It gave the abandoned space an almost sacred stillness, like a chapel built for secrets. Atlas circled once, nose lifted, tail rigid. His paws left clear prints in the dust, a dust that hadn't been disturbed in years, except by the fresh tracks leading up the concealed stairway. Tracks that weren't his. Logan stood slowly, eyes sweeping over the studio. Easels stood like tall shadows in the dim light. Shelves sagged under the weight of jars, brushes, hardened palettes, and cups filled with stiffened paint. Canvases lined every wall, some completed, some mid-stroke, others nothing but blank white surfaces waiting for inspiration that never came. The air here felt heavier than the rest of the mansion. Older, fuller. This was her sanctuary, Logan whispered. Every mark she made. She made it up here. Atlas padded toward a cluster of finished paintings stacked neatly against the far wall. He sniffed each one with careful interest, as though trying to piece together a trail only he could understand. Logan turned his attention back to the mysterious canvas, the soldier and the dog. The man in the painting wore a uniform remarkably similar to the one Logan had worn overseas, right down to the insignia on the sleeve. His face wasn't fully detailed. Eleanor seemed to have left the features intentionally vague, but the posture, the stance, even the outline of his jaw could have been Logan's silhouette reflected from another life. And the dog beside him. Atlas tilted his head as he studied his own painted doppelganger. How could she have painted this? Logan murmured. You weren't even born 20 years ago. Atlas gave a low, puzzled whine, as if agreeing with Logan's disbelief. Logan ran his thumb across the carved numbers on the frame. 19, 43, 77, 2. He stared at them, mind moving like clockwork. Key dates, important dates. Atlas brushed against his leg, guiding him toward a long wooden work table near the window. Logan followed, scanning the clutter left behind. There were sketchbooks stacked beneath dried leaves that had blown in from a cracked pane, a ceramic mug filled with hardened brushes, rolls of canvas tied with twine, and beneath them all, a leather-bound book. Eleanor's journal. Logan lifted it, blowing off the dust. The cover creaked open. The entries leaped out at him in Eleanor's careful handwriting. 1943. Work on the foundation begins. A home built not for grandeur, but for refuge. 1977. The year they cast me out. The year I understood who they truly were. 1902. His birth year. The man who stood beside me when no one else would. 2019. I began preparing in earnest. I knew time was thinning beneath my feet. I needed everything to align for the one who would come after. Logan swallowed hard. She had left the code on purpose. Who were you planning all this for? He whispered. Atlas responded with a soft bark, turning his head toward the back corner of the studio. Logan followed his gaze. Leaning against the wall, half hidden behind a cracked stool, was another easel holding a canvas. This one was covered with a drape. The cloth seemed freshly disturbed, as if someone had brushed against it not long ago. Logan approached slowly. He reached for the drape and pulled it down. Beneath it lay the beginnings of a vast painting, an unfinished portrait of the Whitford mansion bathed in summer light. The trees were lush and green, sunlight glimmering off the windows. Flowers lined the front steps, filling the scene with warmth and life. But it wasn't the mansion that made Logan's breath catch. It was the figures in the upstairs window. A man and a dog. The man's silhouette was unmistakable. Broad shoulders, straight spine, the stance of someone trained to stand at attention even when no one was watching. His posture was Logan's. There was no denying it. And beside him stood a German shepherd with Atlas's exact markings, even down to the small swirl of darker fur between his shoulders. Atlas pressed close to Logan, placing his chin gently against Logan's knee. Logan's throat tightened. He brushed his thumb over the surface of the canvas, feeling the faint grooves left by Eleanor's brush. She painted us, he whispered. But how could she paint what she never saw? A gust of wind rattled the skylights above, casting shifting patterns of moonlight across the room. Dust swirled in the air like drifting snowflakes. Logan backed away, heart pounding with the weight of everything he couldn't understand. He turned toward Atlas. There's something she's trying to show us. Something hidden. Atlas moved toward the far wall where an old wardrobe sat, its wood cracked but sturdy. He pawed at the back of it again, just as he had the mirror downstairs. But this time his claws scraped metal. Logan stepped closer and saw it. The faint outline of another concealed panel. This one taller and wider. A new path. A deeper secret. He placed a hand on the wardrobe's frame. Okay, he whispered. You found the first one. Let's see what else is hiding up here. Atlas barked softly, ready. Logan pushed his shoulder against the wardrobe and felt the world shift. The wardrobe groaned under the pressure, wood scraping against old floorboards as it tipped forward just enough to expose a narrow seam in the wall behind it. A rush of cold air drifted out, far colder than the studio's already frigid temperature. The draft felt like it came from some place sealed for decades, a place time itself had forgotten. Atlas pressed beside Logan, nose pressed forward, tail rigid with alertness. "Okay, boy. Let's see what she hid here." Logan pulled the wardrobe farther aside, revealing a metal door embedded in the wall. It wasn't decorative. It wasn't part of the original house design. This door was reinforced steel, painted once in green, but now dulled by rust and dust. A heavy combination lock sat in the center, its brass face mottled with age. The carved numbers from the painting frame echoed in Logan's mind. 19, 43, 77, 02. He wiped dust from the metal plate, revealing faint engravings beneath the grime. 4 small notches carved around the dial, exactly matching the 4-number sequence. Eleanor had left reminders everywhere. "Foundation laid in 43, Logan murmured. "Cast out in 77. Her husband born in 02. And the project started in 2019. He turned the dial. 1, 9, 4, 3, 7, 7, 0, 2. Each number clicked into place with a deep, satisfying weight, as if the mansion itself acknowledged the correct answer. Then, a loud metallic thunk echoed behind the door, rattling dust loose from the frame. Atlas stiffened, ears perked. Logan grasped the lever and pulled. At first, nothing happened. The mechanism groaned, stubborn with age. Then the hinges gave way, screeching like an animal waking from a long slumber. The crack widened into a passageway, swallowed in complete darkness. Atlas's nose twitched. He stepped forward, testing the air with a low rumble of curiosity rather than fear. "Stay close," Logan whispered, sweeping his flashlight beam inside. The narrow hallway stretched 10 feet before dipping downward into a short staircase. Pipes ran along the ceiling, frost clinging to their surface. Concrete walls replaced the mansion's wooden framing, cold, industrial, built with intention. This wasn't a servant's crawl space or old storage. This was something Eleanor designed for secrecy, something important. Atlas took the first step, paused silent on the concrete. Logan followed. The deeper they descended, the colder the air became, almost metallic in its bite. The hum of the storm outside faded until the world narrowed to the sound of their breathing and the soft scrape of their footsteps. At the bottom of the stairs, the passageway opened into a small antechamber. A single light bulb hung overhead, dead but intact, encased in a protective cage. Logan traced the wiring with his eyes. Someone had once installed this space with care, not as an afterthought. Ahead stood a second door. This one was larger, far sturdier, its thick steel surface framed with bolts the size of his thumb. The paint hadn't flaked off here. Instead, it had darkened into a deep olive tone. A heavy locking wheel sat at its center, similar to those used in high-security vaults. Atlas approached the door, placing a paw against the cold metal. Then he looked back at Logan, eyes full of expectation, as if they had reached a place Eleanor specifically intended them to find. Logan touched the locking wheel. Its surface was colder than the surrounding air, as if whatever lay behind it had remained sealed off from the world's warmth for decades. He inhaled deeply and turned the wheel. It resisted at first, frozen stiff from time. Logan braced himself and pushed harder. A sharp crack echoed through the chamber as the wheel finally broke free. He turned again. Another creak, then a loud, satisfying clunk. The vault door released with a hiss of stale air. The slow, grinding swing of the door filled the chamber, metal scraping metal as the heavy slab inched open. Logan lifted the flashlight. The beam spilled into a cavernous room beyond, and his breath caught. Rows of metal filing cabinets lined the walls, each labeled by decade. Glass display cases stood in the center, their contents glinting faintly, coins, jewelry, certificates, and dominating the far wall was something that made Logan freeze entirely. A massive built-in safe. Its frame gleamed under the flashlight's beam, untouched by time, the green paint vibrant against the concrete. Brass fixtures shone despite the dust. It was a vault inside a vault, a final layer of protection, the centerpiece of everything Eleanor had hidden. Atlas stepped inside the room, sniffing eagerly, tail giving one tentative wag, as if sensing they were close to an answer. Logan followed him, stunned into silence by the room's sheer scale and purpose. "This," Logan whispered, voice cracking from the weight of the discovery. "What were you guarding, Eleanor?" Right above the built-in safe, a framed poem hung neatly on the wall. The edges of the paper had yellowed, but the words remained crisp. In 27, this house was born, where 43 acres dreams were sworn. In 48, two hearts aligned. In 98, freedom. I did find, know the numbers, know what matters. Logan read the poem twice, then a third time. His pulse quickened. "Another code," he murmured. Atlas sat beside him, watching, waiting, the glow of the flashlight reflecting in his steady amber eyes. Logan stepped toward the enormous safe, heart pounding as the truth clicked into place. They had unlocked the path, but the vault itself was still waiting for the right hands to open it. Logan stood before the massive built-in safe, the cold metal seeming to pulse with a quiet intensity. It felt alive somehow, like it held a heartbeat made of secrets, waiting, guarding, choosing. Atlas sat at Logan's side, tail low, head tilted just slightly, as if he too sensed the weight of what lay behind the steel. Logan ran his flashlight over the safe. The brass fixtures were polished enough to catch the light, despite the decades of silence. Someone, Eleanor no doubt, had cared for this place with precision. Not a haphazard stash, a designed vault, a final resting place for something that mattered. His gaze shifted back to the poem on the wall. In 27, this house was born, where 43 acres dreams were sworn. In 48, two hearts aligned. In 98, freedom I did find. Know the numbers, know what matters. He murmured the lines quietly. 1927, house built. 43 acres, the land. 1948, marriage. 1998, divorce. Dates, moments, anchors in someone's life. Eleanor had tied the combination to her deepest memories, the ones that shaped her, protected her, freed her. Logan exhaled slowly, steadying his hands as he faced the dial. Atlas rose and stood beside him, watching every movement with focused eyes. "All right, boy," Logan whispered. "Here goes." He turned the dial to 43. A faint click echoed through the vault. Then 27. Another click, deeper this time, resonating through the steel floor. Then 98. The lock shifted, groaning like an awakening giant. Finally, 48. For a moment, nothing. Then, a heavy metallic thunk thundered through the chamber, vibrating up the walls, sending a puff of dust drifting from the ceiling. The wheel loosened under Logan's hand. He swallowed hard and pulled. The door swung open with a long, aching groan. Inside, lights flickered on automatically, old fluorescent bulbs that hummed to life, flooding the vault with a pale glow. Logan blinked, stunned. Rows of shelves filled the room, lined with metal cases stamped with federal seals. Stacks of bearer bonds sat wrapped in cotton bands. Wooden drawers held certificates from companies he recognized even from a distance. Apple, Ford, Boeing, Amazon. Early-issue stock certificates worth unimaginable sums today. Glass display cases held gold coins, rare jewelry, and delicate items preserved in velvet-lined boxes. A leather binder sat open on a pedestal at the center of the vault. Logan approached, heartbeat pounding beneath his ribs. The pages were handwritten in Eleanor's elegant script. Whitford Legacy Inventory. Total assets. He skimmed the columns. Bearer bonds, $87,000 stock certificates, $112,000. Real estate holdings, $43,000. Art and jewelry, $18,000. Rare coins and metals, $15,000. At the bottom, a final total, $265,000. Logan staggered back a step. The flashlight slipped slightly in his grip, its beam quivering across the vault shelves. $265 million? He whispered. Eleanor, what were you planning? Atlas moved to him, nudging his arm gently. Logan rested a hand on the dog's head, grounding himself. He turned another page in the inventory. The next section was labeled Legacy Project for my true heir. Below it, a single sentence. If you are reading this, then everything I built is now in your hands. Protect it wisely, Logan. The truth was worth everything I lost. Logan swallowed the lump rising in his throat. He had barely known Eleanor, met her once as a boy, yet she had built an empire in the shadows and hidden it away, not out of greed, but out of fear of the very family that had just disowned him in court. He traced the ink with his fingers. Atlas wandered to a corner of the vault, where a smaller metal box sat on a shelf. The box was thin but sturdy, secured with a simple latch. The words Whitford Legacy Project were engraved on its lid. Atlas barked once, low, urging. You found another piece, huh? Logan murmured, walking toward the box. He lifted it carefully and carried it back to the pedestal. The lid clicked open with ease. Inside were thick files, sealed envelopes, and a handwritten letter on the same cream-colored stationery as the first message Eleanor had sent him. My dear Logan, if you have reached this room, then you understand now why I hid everything. Our family has always craved control, not love. They would never have let this estate become what it was meant to be. Sanctuary. You were the only one with the heart strong enough to inherit its truth. Logan exhaled softly, eyes burning. Atlas rested his head against Logan's thigh, as if sensing the weight of the words. Logan placed the letter aside and looked around the vault, truly looked. Eleanor hadn't hoarded wealth. She had preserved it, gathered it, grown it for decades with one purpose, to pass it to someone who would do what she could not. A soft rustle echoed through the vault, snapping Logan to attention. He turned sharply, scanning the shadows, but nothing moved. Only the hum of the old lights filled the air. Still, a prickle crawled down his neck. Someone else had been in this house recently. He was certain now. He closed the metal box and swept the vault with one last glance. We need to get back upstairs, Atlas. We can't stay down here too long. Atlas barked once in agreement. As they stepped through the vault door and began the climb back toward the world above, Logan kept one thought close. This wasn't just an inheritance. It was a warning. And the storm inside the mansion had only just begun. By the time Logan and Atlas climbed back up the narrow passageway into the art studio, the wind outside had grown into a roar. The skylights trembled under waves of icy gusts, rattling like someone was striking them from above. Snow swirled in chaotic spirals across the glass panes, turning the room into a dim, shifting world of white and shadow. Logan closed the hidden door behind them, securing the latch. We'll come back once things settle, he murmured. But he knew the truth. Nothing was settled. Not anymore. Atlas paced near the easels, ears pinned back. Something had changed in his posture. Not fear, but a heightened alertness. The kind that told Logan danger was no longer a possibility. It was close. "Let's get downstairs. We need to regroup." They descended the concealed staircase carefully, stepping back into the master bedroom. Logan checked the hallway, silent, dark, stretching both ways like an empty spine. He moved toward the landing, Atlas beside him. Halfway down the grand staircase, Logan froze. The lights outside the mansion, the ones barely visible through the blizzard, were gone. For a moment, he thought the storm had swallowed them. But then a faint glow appeared far down the long driveway. Headlights. Multiple sets. Atlas growled low, his entire body tensing. "No, not now," Logan whispered. The headlights grew larger, crawling up the snowy path like cautious predators. Black SUVs, 3 of them, pushed through the drifts. They stopped right before the mansion's steps, engines idling, steam rising from the exhaust. The doors opened. Bryce. Lydia. 2 men in heavy jackets, broad-shouldered, hard-eyed. Not local, not friends. Logan shifted back into the shadows of the staircase. "Trouble's here, Atlas." Below, the sound of boots hitting the porch echoed up the entrance hall. Bryce's voice carried through the front door before it even opened. "Logan, you in there? We need to have a talk." The door, still unlocked from before, swung inward with a blast of frigid air. Bryce stepped inside first, brushing snow from his expensive coat, eyes scanning the dim hall with practiced arrogance. Lydia followed, her expression cold, lips pressed into a thin line. The men with them moved like enforcers, professional, silent. Logan whispered, "Stay behind me," though Atlas was already positioning himself between Logan and the threat below. Bryce planted himself at the foot of the staircase. "There you are," he called, spotting Logan's silhouette. His smile was slick and poisonous. "Thought you'd run away again. Seems to be your specialty." Lydia folded her arms. "We know what you found." Logan stepped forward just enough for his voice to carry. "This is my house. You don't belong here." Bryce laughed. "Your house? Please, you manipulated an old woman. You took advantage of her. We're here to correct that." "You don't know anything about her," Logan replied. "We know enough." Bryce nodded toward the 2 hired men. "Let's keep this civil. Sign over the property, walk away with a generous amount of cash, and we'll pretend this never happened." One of the hired men opened a briefcase. Inside lay a stack of legal papers and an envelope. Bryce tapped the envelope with 2 fingers. $100,000. Cash. More money than you've seen in your life. Take it, and you don't have to deal with courts or lawyers or anything messy. Atlas let out a sharp bark that echoed across the hall. Bryce flinched. "Control your animal." Logan's voice dropped. "He's telling you to leave." Lydia stepped forward, anger flaring in her eyes. "You think a dog scares us? You really think you can keep all that money without consequences?" Logan remained still, calm. "I'm not selling, and I'm not signing." The hall fell silent, thick, tense, electric. Bryce sighed heavily, signaling his men. "I was hoping we could do this the easy way." The 2 enforcers moved toward the stairs. Atlas reacted first. He sprinted down the steps with a warning bark that turned into a deep growl, placing himself between Logan and the advancing men. His posture was defensive, not aggressive, but firm enough to halt them. "Back off," Logan warned. But one of the men reached out anyway, stepping into Atlas's space. Atlas lunged, not to maul, but to push, forcing the man backward. The enforcer stumbled into the wall, startled. Bryce panicked. He reached into his coat. Logan's voice boomed, sharp and commanding from years of training. "Don't you dare!" Bryce froze. Lydia's face went pale. The second enforcer stepped forward again, too quickly this time. Atlas lunged, intercepting him, knocking him off balance with a powerful shove of his chest and forelegs. The man hit the floor with a grunt. Then, in the chaos, something metallic flashed briefly. A firearm, half drawn before Bryce realized how badly the moment had spiraled. Logan moved instantly, stepping in front of Atlas, shielding the dog with his own body. "Stop! Nobody moves!" The moment held, tight as a wire pulled to its breaking point. Then Lydia grabbed Bryce's arm, hissed something urgent into his ear. Bryce hesitated, eyes darting from the stairs to the dark hall, then to the storm raging outside. The enforcers steadied themselves, shaken by Atlas's power. Finally, Bryce lowered his voice. "This isn't over, Logan," Lydia added. "We'll let the courts handle you, and we'll win." They backed out slowly, the storm's howl filling the space between words. Atlas remained tense until the last SUV door slammed shut and the engines retreated down the long driveway. Only then did Logan breathe again. He knelt beside Atlas, burying a hand in the dog's fur. "You saved us," he whispered. "Again." Atlas leaned into him, chest rising and falling in steady waves. Outside, the blizzard continued, wind battering the mansion like a warning drum. Logan stood, staring at the empty doorway. This wasn't just a family feud anymore. It was war. And the mansion, Eleanor's legacy, was now the battlefield. Logan barely slept that night. The storm outside hammered the walls like an angry tide, while the events replayed in his mind. Bryce's smug voice, Lydia's icy glare, the enforcer's heavy footsteps, the flash of a weapon. Atlas stayed curled at Logan's side, head resting across Logan's boots, refusing to leave his post even for a moment. By dawn, the blizzard had quieted to a soft whisper of falling snow. Pale light filtered through the mansion's tall windows, casting long shadows across the grand staircase. The house felt calmer now, almost watchful, as if Eleanor herself were standing guard. Logan patted Atlas gently. "We need to get ahead of this before they twist it into something it's not." Atlas rose immediately. Logan grabbed his coat, slipped the brass key Eleanor left into his pocket, and headed for town. The drive down the mountain was slow but manageable. Snow blanketed the pines and fields, turning Timber Ridge into a quiet white world. Each mile seemed to pull him further from the chaos of the night before. Downtown Silver Creek was just waking up. A few trucks idled outside shops. A diner sign flickered to life. And right near the courthouse, a familiar figure stood on the steps. A man in his 60s with a thick coat, silver hair, and an upright posture that radiated authority. Judge Marvin Hensley. Logan felt a flicker of relief. Hensley waved him over. "You picked quite a time to inherit a property, son." His voice was firm but not unkind. "Rebecca told me what happened. Come inside." Logan followed him through the courthouse doors. The interior was warm, filled with the faint smell of coffee and old paper. Hensley motioned for him to sit in a modest office lined with law books and framed community awards. Atlas settled at Logan's feet, eyes sharp. "All right," Hensley said, lowering into his chair. "Tell me everything." Logan recounted the storm, the discovery of the mansion, the footsteps, the vault, the confrontation with Bryce and the others. He spoke calmly, sticking to the facts, something drilled into him from years of writing field reports. Hensley listened without interrupting, his expression tightening with each detail. When Logan finished, the judge leaned back, hands steepled beneath his chin. "They'll twist this," he said. "They'll claim you threatened them. They'll claim you forced your way into the estate. They'll try to paint you as unstable." Logan's jaw clenched. "They started it. They came armed." "I know," Hensley replied, "but Bryce and Lydia are well-connected and well-funded. They'll drag this through every legal avenue they can find." "So what do I do?" Hensley stood and walked to a filing cabinet. He opened it, pulled out a manila folder, then handed it to Logan. "You'll let me represent you. I may be retired, but I know this community, and I knew Eleanor very well." Logan blinked. "You knew her?" "Everyone here did," Hensley said. "She funded the library, the clinic, the old mill renovation, quietly, without credit." He placed a hand on Logan's shoulder. "She wasn't eccentric. She was deliberate. She knew exactly who she wanted to inherit that estate." Logan swallowed, emotion rising unexpectedly. "She barely knew me." Hensley shook his head. "No. She watched you the same way this town watches out for its own." Before Logan could respond, the office door opened and Rebecca Langford stepped in, face pale with urgency. "Bryce and Lydia just filed an emergency petition," she said. "They're claiming the estate is under threat and must be frozen immediately." Hensley's eyes hardened. "So they want to fight?" Rebecca nodded. "They're pushing for an immediate hearing within the hour." Atlas growled softly. Hensley grabbed his coat. "Then we'll give them one." The courtroom filled quickly. Locals, store owners, retired ranchers, young families, slipped quietly into the benches, whispering among themselves. They had heard the rumors, the estranged nephew, the secret mansion, the storm, the confrontation. Bryce and Lydia arrived with 3 attorneys in tailored suits. They looked confident, polished, rehearsed. Bryce shot Logan a cold smile. Judge Celia Thornton entered, stern, sharp-eyed, known county-wide for her fairness. "We will hear the emergency petition filed by Bryce Carver and Lydia Carver," she announced. "Proceed." One of the attorneys stood. "Your Honor, we believe Mr. Logan Pierce has unlawfully taken possession of assets belonging to the Whitford estate. These assets may include sensitive financial holdings. Furthermore, Mr. Pierce has exhibited unstable behavior." Logan's chest tightened. Atlas pressed against his leg. Hensley rose slowly, his presence filling the room. "Your Honor," he said, "I have reviewed the documents personally. The will is legitimate, witnessed, filed correctly." Eleanor Whitford left the estate to Mr. Pierce explicitly, and with clear intent. Thornton nodded. "And this alleged unstable behavior?" Hensley's voice remained calm. "Mr. Pierce was confronted in his own home by armed individuals. He responded defensively and ensured no harm came to anyone. I'd call that stability." The opposing lawyer shifted uncomfortably. "We have evidence," he insisted. "A recording." Hensley stepped forward. "And I have one as well." He placed a flash drive on the table. "This contains sealed recordings Mrs. Whitford left behind," he said. "Recordings affirming her choice of heir, and documenting previous attempts by the petitioners," he gestured to Bryce and Lydia, "to seize her assets without consent." A ripple of shock moved through the courtroom. Lydia's face drained of color. Bryce stiffened. "Play it," Judge Thornton ordered. Hensley inserted the drive. Eleanor's voice filled the room, warm, steady, heartbreakingly clear. "If you are hearing this, then they are trying again. My estate is not theirs. Logan is my rightful heir. He has the heart this family lost long ago." Gasps broke out softly among the listeners. Thornton leaned forward. "Anything further, Mr. Carver?" Bryce tried to speak, but his mouth opened and closed without sound. Lydia looked away, blinking rapidly. Hensley stepped back, hands folded behind him. Judge Thornton straightened. "The petition is denied. Mr. Pierce retains full rights to the estate. Case dismissed." The courtroom erupted into murmurs of relief and quiet applause. Logan felt his breath release all at once, shoulders sagging under the emotional weight. Atlas pressed his head against Logan's thigh. They had won, at least for now. Outside the courthouse, as people congratulated Logan and thanked Atlas for his bravery, Bryce brushed past, shoving his shoulder hard. "We're not finished," he hissed. You can't hide behind these people forever. Logan didn't react. Atlas did, with a single protective step between them. Bryce walked off in anger, disappearing into the cold morning air. Logan looked down at his dog. "We're not hiding," he said softly. "We're standing." Atlas wagged his tail once, slow and sure, and together they headed back toward Timber Ridge, toward the mansion, the vault, the legacy, and the truth still waiting in its deepest shadows. The drive up the mountain was quiet. The storm had passed, leaving behind a landscape blanketed in untouched snow that glittered under the afternoon sun. Logan felt the weight of the courtroom victory still settling in his chest. Relief, disbelief, and something deeper. Something heavier. Eleanor had protected him even in death. But the words she'd spoken in the recording echoed in his mind. If they are trying again. Again. How many battles had she fought alone? Atlas nudged Logan's elbow, breaking him from his thoughts. "I'm all right, buddy," Logan murmured, though he wasn't entirely sure it was true. The mansion came into view, towering, silent, imposing. Yet it felt different now. Not haunted. Not cold. More like it was waiting. Logan parked the truck beside the steps and opened the door. The cold air bit at his skin, crisp and clean. Atlas hopped out and immediately sniffed the air, scanning the property with alert, confident eyes. Inside, the mansion was still. Logan walked through the grand hall, past the staircase, past the covered furniture, until he reached the concealed passage leading down to the vault. Atlas followed close, tail low but relaxed. When they reached the vault's steel door, Logan hesitated only a moment before stepping inside. The fluorescent lights flickered on with a soft hum. Everything was exactly as they had left it. The filing cabinets arranged by decade, the display cases showcasing gold and history, the safe yawning open like a gateway to the past. And sitting on the pedestal in the center was the leather box labeled Whitford Legacy Project. Logan rested his hand on the lid for a moment. "Let's finish this," he said quietly. Atlas settled beside him as Logan opened the box. Inside were several sealed envelopes, a bundle of photographs tied together with ribbon, and a thick file folder. Logan lifted the file first. It was filled with documentation, charity receipts, purchase records, donation logs. Eleanor had funded homeless shelters, veteran hospitals, K-9 rehabilitation programs, and counseling centers. Millions of dollars sent quietly, anonymously, consistently. He breathed out slowly. You were helping people the whole time. The deeper he read, the more clear her intentions became. Every investment, every acquisition had been purposeful. She hadn't been building wealth. She had been building a foundation. Atlas's nose brushed Logan's hand, guiding him toward a final envelope tucked beneath the stack. Its paper was aged, yellow at the edges, sealed with wax embossed with the Whitford family insignia. Logan lifted it with care. His name was written across the front in Eleanor's delicate handwriting. To Logan Pierce, the one who understands what it means to be broken and still choose to stand. His chest tightened as he broke the seal. Inside was a single letter. My dear Logan, if you are holding this, then you have seen the truth of my life. I was cast out, just as you were. I built this estate not for pride, but so no one could ever take my worth from me again. And when I saw you, quiet, wounded, strong, I knew you were the one who needed this place, not for wealth, but for healing. Logan blinked hard, breath unsteady as he continued. You carry scars no one can see. I carried them too, once. This house saved me. I pray it will save you. One last thing you must know. Your companion Atlas, he was not an accident in your life. Logan froze. Atlas lifted his head, tilting it as if listening too. Logan read on. Years ago, I funded a military therapy program, a small, classified project designed to pair returning veterans with highly trained canines. Dogs bred not just for service, but for connection. Atlas came from that program. I ensured he would be placed in your unit long before you knew he existed. I chose him for you, and I chose you for him. Logan felt the world tilt. He pressed a hand to his forehead, overwhelmed. Eleanor had orchestrated everything, quietly, gently, intentionally. She hadn't just left him a house. She had given him the partner who had pulled him through the darkest nights, the dog who had kept him alive. Atlas placed his paw on Logan's knee. A simple gesture, a grounding one. A reminder that some bonds aren't formed. They're destined. Logan wiped his eyes and read the final lines. The two of you will do more together than I ever could alone. This legacy is yours now. Not just the fortune, but the purpose. Build something better than what we were taught. Give others the sanctuary we were denied. With all my hope, Eleanor Whitford. Logan folded the letter with trembling hands. Silence settled heavy in the vault, but not empty silence. A silence filled with understanding, connection, and grief that was finally healing. He looked at Atlas. She brought us together, he whispered. She knew what we'd need before we did. Atlas leaned forward and pressed his forehead gently against Logan's. For a man who'd spent years burying emotions under discipline and survival, the moment broke something open. In a good way, a necessary way. Finally, Logan stood and closed the box. We know the truth now, he said softly, and it's our turn to carry it forward. Atlas barked once, quiet, warm, certain. They left the vault and climbed the stairs back toward the light. The mansion no longer felt cold, no longer felt haunted. It felt like a beginning, a promise, a mission. Those words echoed in Logan's mind as he and Atlas stepped out of the vault and back into the quiet halls of the Whitford mansion. The house, once cold and intimidating, now felt warmer somehow. Alive with purpose, humming with the spirit Eleanor had poured into every beam and brick. It wasn't just his inheritance anymore. It was a calling. Over the next few months, Logan worked tirelessly. The snow melted slowly as spring crept over Timber Ridge, revealing pine-covered hills, winding trails, and open land Eleanor had once cherished. Logan hired local contractors, electricians, and builders, people he trusted, people who understood what the mansion meant to the community. Together, they restored rooms that had been untouched for decades. Atlas was everywhere during the renovations, guiding workers to safe places, alerting Logan to structural issues, and greeting visitors with the calm steadiness of a seasoned therapy dog. The locals adored him. Children laughed and hugged him. Veterans nodded with quiet respect. And slowly, the mansion transformed. The third floor, once Eleanor's sanctuary, became the Veterans' Healing Wing, a set of private rooms for soldiers battling trauma, offering quiet space and warmth. The grand dining room turned into a community kitchen. The library, still lined with Eleanor's thousands of books, opened to the public. Art classes, writing workshops, and support groups filled the calendar. Logan named it the Timber Ridge Veteran Sanctuary, dedicated to Eleanor Whitford, who believed in second chances. The day of the opening ceremony arrived on a crisp, sunlit morning in early summer. Dozens of locals stood on the lawn. Town officials, volunteers, families, ranchers, elderly couples, teenagers in community t-shirts. Veterans from across the state came as well, some walking with canes, some with service animals, some simply seeking the comfort of being understood. Logan stood on the steps of the mansion, with Atlas at his side. The dog sat tall, chest out, ears forward, as if sensing the significance of the moment. Judge Hensley approached with a warm smile. You did it, son. She'd be proud. Logan looked at the mansion's towering windows, sunlight reflecting off the glass. I had help, he said, placing a hand on Atlas's back. More than I realized. The ceremony began. Town leaders spoke. Veterans shared stories. And then Logan took the podium. I didn't inherit this place because of blood, he began, voice steady. I inherited it because someone believed in who I could become, even on the days I couldn't believe it myself. Atlas nudged his hand, grounding him. This house isn't about money or land or old family grudges. It's about healing. It's about standing up again after life knocks you down. Eleanor knew what it meant to be cast out, and she made sure no one else would feel that alone again. Around him, the crowd fell silent, listening intently. This sanctuary is for every veteran who needs a home, every family who needs support, and every person who needs a reminder that tomorrow can be better. When Logan stepped back, the crowd erupted into applause. Some wiped their eyes. Others clapped heartily. Atlas barked once, as if adding his own approval. Later, as children toured the library and volunteers set out food, Logan walked the perimeter of the mansion grounds. Sunlight spilled across the hills, warming the earth that had survived the long winter. Atlas trotted beside him, tail swaying in an easy rhythm. Near the old stone well, Logan noticed two figures approaching. Bryce and Lydia. They looked different. No expensive suits, no polished shoes, just simple clothes, worn and humble. Their faces carried exhaustion, but also something else. Regret. Bryce cleared his throat. Logan, we came to apologize. Lydia nodded slowly, tears glistening in her eyes. We were wrong. About everything. We thought money mattered more than people. We paid the price for that. Logan studied them quietly. Anger might have come months ago, but now? Standing in the place Eleanor built, surrounded by the community she loved, anger only felt like wasted energy. We want to make things right, Bryce said. If there's anything we can do, any work you'll give us. Logan reached into his pocket, pulling out 2 applications. The sanctuary needs groundskeepers and program assistants. Entry-level, honest work. Bryce stared at the papers, stunned. You'd trust us with this? No, Logan replied gently. But I'll give you the chance to earn it. Lydia began to cry softly. Eleanor believed in second chances, Logan said. So do I. They took the applications with shaky hands and walked away slowly, humbled in ways no courtroom ever could have managed. As the sun dipped toward the mountain ridge, Logan returned to the front steps. Voices and laughter filled the mansion behind him. Veterans talking with counselors, children reading books, neighbors carrying trays of food. Warmth radiated from the windows like the house itself was alive with gratitude. Atlas stood beside him, head held high, watching the sunset turn the snowy peaks gold. Logan placed a hand on the dog's neck. She didn't just give me a house, boy. She gave us a mission. Atlas answered with a soft bark, the sound warm and sure. Logan smiled as the wind rustled the pines, carrying Eleanor's presence through the quiet evening air. The mansion, once a fortress, was now a beacon, a place where broken hearts could come to be whole again. The shadows lengthened. The lights inside glowed brighter. And standing there, with Atlas beside him and the sanctuary alive behind him, Logan felt something he hadn't felt in years. Peace. A real second chance. A life finally worth living. Together they stepped back inside, into warmth, into purpose, into a legacy reborn. If you believe Logan and Atlas deserved this justice, drop a simple 1 in the comments so I know you're with them. And if you've ever fought for what was rightfully yours, type yes. Your story matters too. Stick around and subscribe for more real American stories about courage, dignity, and standing your ground.
The story of Logan Pierce and his dog Atlas may have reached its conclusion, but the lessons it leaves behind profoundly redefine the true meaning of a legacy. While people like Bryce and Lydia believed that wealth and power were all that mattered, ultimately losing themselves and facing bitter regret, Eleanor and Logan proved a vastly different truth. The staggering $2.65 million fortune wasn't used to satisfy personal greed. Instead, it was transformed into a beacon of healing. The Timber Ridge estate, once a cold fortress guarding forgotten secrets, became a sanctuary for veterans with scarred souls and broken lives needing a second chance. More than that, this story honors the incredible power of true companionship. Atlas wasn't just a pet, he was the embodiment of a connection orchestrated long ago to save a wounded soldier's soul. That unconditional love and loyalty helped Logan stand firm against the darkest betrayal and the harshest storms. Ultimately, this tale delivers a powerful message about the strength of forgiveness. Despite being cast out and pushed to the absolute edge by his own blood, Logan chose grace over vengeance. He offered his former enemies a chance to rebuild their dignity through honest work. He refused to let hatred consume him, choosing instead to break his family's toxic cycle with compassion. Life may sometimes strip us of everything, but just like Logan, how we rise and use our own scars to protect others is what builds a truly immortal legacy. If you believe Logan and Atlas deserve this justice, drop a 1-inch in the comments so I know you stand with them. And if you've ever had to fight for what was rightfully yours, type yes. Your story matters too. Stick around and subscribe for more real American stories about courage, dignity, and standing your ground.